you ready for the truth? Bring it on!
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Do you want the whole truth? I don't think you're ready.
Governments don't control things. A government can't control the economy without controlling people.
It's Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth.
Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. We're really glad you're here, right here on the AFR Talk Network. We've got an extraordinary show. This hour, you'll learn what Kareem? Cap? Did he turn to Jello? Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and what he said to Charlie Rose about race and it went unchallenged? Yes, we'll get to that. Is that the breaking news? No, the breaking news has to do with executive orders and President Obama and guns and background checks. I'll bring you up to speed as best I can on that. And that means as news comes in. Also, we will be talking about the economic recovery. You say what recovery? That's right. You'll be chiming in at the bottom of the hour. Next hour, at this time, we'll be speaking with Dr. Bruce Thornton. He is the author of The Wages of Appeasement, and he's going to take on Kim Jong-un, Dennis Rodman, and allegedly feeding your uncle to the dogs, what we don't understand about evil and dictators. Bruce Thornton, next hour. Right now, we go to our good friend. He is the real Woodward, Chris Woodward, business and environment reporter for American Family News, onenewsnow.com. Joins us either Friday or Thursday, depending. And his Twitter is... Chris?
At AFNC Woodward.
Say it again.
At AFNC Woodward.
All right. So let's jump right in.
All right.
With Bryant Gumbel. This is great. I always have this warm memory in the land of when I didn't understand or know about politics or issues, that Bryant Gumbel is just a really nice guy, and then he went off to do a sports show called Real Sports, and Armin Contain and some other great reporters are there.
Sure.
So, yeah, I feel good about Bryant Gumbel, right? Well, not so much. And when we look at just how far to the left Bryant Gumbel is, the former Today Show host, joining the crew again, as well as NBC turning it into MSNBC. Roll it.
And number 5, the federal government shutdown. I think that was on most of our lists as well.
Yeah, but I called it the GOP shutdown.
I know you did. Yes,
I thought it was a false equivalency for people to say it was a government shutdown, a failure of government. It was not. It was a few individuals who were trying to extort the government.
A lot of our users put a lot of blame on Republicans.
I wonder why. So tell me this, Chris, when you hear that, I have no problem with people having an opinion on it, but remember, he was the anchor.
Sure.
So your thoughts as a journalist when you see that clip provided by newsbusters.org?
I'm not surprised. And I will say, in my own opinion, that set that they do on occasion with those monitors on the Today Show is the poor man's Fox News deck.
Ouch. Really
But, yeah, I mean, Shep has, 40-inch or 40,000-inch screens, whereas the Today Show has much smaller. But back to what you were asking. He's not the first one to do it. Certainly, we've seen Costas take on a editorial stance on issues that he takes exception with. So I'm not surprised, and certainly, it's a little uncalled for.
Okay. I'll definitely give you that. It is uncalled for. I guess what gets me is that when we talk about media bias, I guess this is what we're talking about. The mainstream media, for those maybe just getting into the picture here, said, New Year's resolution. I'm listening to Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth proudly on AFR Talk, and I'm locking it in because I want to hear Dan the Man and the rest of the crew.
Sure.
Okay? And the rest of the crew includes you, American Family News, top of every hour. So tell me this. When we talk about the mainstream media, we're talking about people who have an ideological point of view that infects their coverage of a particular issue so that they will actually be not presenting both sides to an issue. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, definitely. We do have some issues, numerous examples, might be a better way to put it, of people putting their perspective in some stories and maybe having stories lean one direction. We see that with climate change. We see it with guns. There's a lot of things with guns today in the news, as you mentioned at the top of your show. So we do see that a lot in media today, unfortunately.
You mentioned climate change. Real quick, I want to hit this.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a big climate story that has taken place over the last week? And if it went the other way, if people like Jim Inhofe, Senator Jim Inhofe, were in the predicament that we're seeing some of the global warming scientists in, currently in Antarctica, what would we have? First off, tell me, is there a story?
That depends on who you ask. Since you asked me, yes, there was a story.
You're the environment reporter for American Family News. Pretty
Right.
big story. It affects business, yes?
Yes, it does. It does. And there was a ship that was stuck in some ice in a part of the country that some people have, or part of the world rather, that some people have pointed to as evidence of global warming. A number of people have failed to mention the mission of the ship. We actually have a story. I did not do the story. Russ Jones did the story. He interviewed someone at Media Research Center. The headline of that story today is "Media Almost Entirely Ignores Purpose of Russian Ship's Quest." As Media Research Center goes on to say in that story, the people on board the ship were actually there to study and look for evidence of global warming. And a lot of people have failed to point that out. But it's not just MRC. I noticed the Five today was actually talking about it, Mr. Gutfeld. So, and he had mentioned too that a lot of the coverage failed to point out why that ship was there.
Okay, so you all covered it. I get it. You're journalists, right? Gutfeld, probably the funniest guy.
He's a funny guy.
Television, radio, whatever it may be. I think he is the guy right now as we look at things. Stewart was once the guy, so this is not about left or right. It's just about being genius, because to be funny day in and day out, as well as articulate on particular issues, yeah, bam, you got to have it. So you cover these issues. American Family News covers these, onenewsnow.com. You have their big issues. Global warming was the centerpiece of President Obama's economic agenda, was it not?
Yes.
I mean, climate change being built on a new economy, the new green economy.
Sure.
He called it the new foundation.
Sure. We've seen efforts, cap and trade, carbon limits, caps, whatever you want to call it. We've seen it in various installments or efforts over the years. Some people think that the EPA's war on coal, as many people call it, is just the administration's effort to get something like cap and trade in place, since Congress said, we're not going to touch this.
And as you said that, even you said, some people say you're just reporting a perspective. As a commentator, this is what separates us. I love you, man, but this is what separates us. Journalism's a lot tougher. Being a journalist is a lot tougher because you've got to get both sides, and you've got to make sure that you're plugging in both sides. As a commentator, I can come on elements of journalism, but what you all do is more difficult.
Sure.
And it's important because what a commentator says, sometimes you got to go to journalists to figure that one out. And I hear comedians and people sounding off who are very bright on the issue, and commentators sounding off on the issue. But when it comes to the coverage by journalists, I don't see it. It troubles me greatly.
Mm-hmm.
That said, I just wanted to let you know.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, we get, I've mentioned this before in some of the segments that we've done here on your show. We get a lot of responses. Some people think, we're horrible human beings for sharing someone's opinion on a story. I've actually had my faith called into question based on something that someone said against ethanol one time. So it does happen. We have been accused of being liberal and conservative at the same time.
And that's kind of a badge.
And I say that we're accused of being liberal because we might feature a story from Mark Smith or Jerry Bodlander that has an audio statement from the president. So some people don't want to hear that. Other people do. We're just sharing what this person has to say or not say.
But again, you're giving us the story. And to make that very clear, giving us the story, giving us the news, and you're saying, here's what this group is saying, here's what the other group is saying, here's the story. But you're allowing for that to be reported. Tell me this. Chuck Todd, we've had Chuck Todd specials.
We have.
Yes, NBC, MSNBC, chief political correspondent, on with Andrea Mitchell the other day, had this to say, roll it.
Let's talk about the Republicans. They were widely blamed for the government shutdown. I think they were in some ways rescued by the debacle with the Obamacare rollout because the heat was off them. Yeah. Do you think they end the year in a better position, though?
I don't, actually, because they haven't fixed their structural problems. All they have done is simply they're not the president when it comes to health care. And so if they're not careful, it's a false sense of security. They may survive this year and then get shellacked again in 2016 if they're not careful. You remember the Republican Party did this whole like what happened, and they threw out this whole okay, we've got to get better with minorities and get better with technology and get better with various issues, not look like we're so anti-woman. They've made no accomplishments on that front. None of it. No. So I think that they're in just as bad of a place, if not worse than they were. It just doesn't look like it right now because of health care.
All right, Chris, tell me. He's in the job of analyzing. He's giving his opinion as the chief White House correspondent. And yet I think he is definitely tilting things. And there's a number of things we can bring up, immigration, a whole host of things. So your response to the guest host's comment and question to Chuck Todd.
Well, when your title is White House correspondent, or one of your titles is White House correspondent, and you're making statements that appear to be completely against anything the GOP says or does, and I'm not saying the GOP doesn't have problems. There is some infighting. Dan the Man has taken on GOP efforts and claims before. But when that is one of your titles, White House correspondent, and you're speaking completely against one of the parties not in the White House, that should say to somebody out there, just the average Joe citizen, that maybe you have a little bias.
And if we go inside the numbers, we won't do it right now, it's a big-time bias because some of the things that he was saying were put on by Democrats who were advising Republicans on how to win. I'm not about D's or R's. You know that. I'm about conservatives.
Right.
But we've got to call things out and hold people to
right.
account.
Yeah, I mentioned this the last time I was on. Yeah, I don't care what letter is next to your name. I'm supposed to tell you what other people are doing with your money.
Chris Woodward, just awesome. Here's something else. Chuck Todd, but it's not too awesome. Maryland governor, Republican, talking to him about the flaws of what happened in Virginia and scaring voters as being part of things when it comes to politics. Chuck Todd and the Maryland governor. Roll it.
Republican Party had put all this emphasis on sort of, particularly the RNC, hey, we've got some issues as a party. We've got to figure out some things having to do with the suburbs, having to do with the demographic changes, having to do with, you brought up women. On paper, it doesn't look like any progress was made. I mean, you look at the race in Virginia, for instance, and you lost because the Democrats were able to essentially win social issues, use social issues as a wedge.
But that's a euphemism. Let's just call it what it is. It was scaring young women. I mean, the last presidential campaign, the Democrats, and I thought it was...
Which campaign? What campaigns aren't about scaring some voters?
Okay. Chris, let's just say that you're sitting back and you're analyzing that for Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, probably on AFR Talk. And much like the news and review on the Fox stations, and they're going over and there's a panel and you're on that panel, what do you say?
You know, well, certainly a lot of campaigns on both sides of the aisle do use some scare tactics to try and get people to the polls. But this is something that we have seen a lot with Mr. Todd, who I have taken up for on occasion.
Yes, you have. You've defended him.
Yes. Well, yeah, because he tries to get the president to answer some questions that he feels the president doesn't answer in White House press briefings and all that stuff. We've talked
outbreaks of journalism. Yes.
But you know, it's long story short, or short answer here. It's same old Todd.
And again, it's not as if they can't do their job, and I think that's what's frustrating. It's the fact that they're blinded by their ideology to do it well and consistently. Those are my words. Chris Woodward will be with us on the flip side, and we'll be talking about Mary Jane. What's that? Oh, the legalization of pot. That's right. In Colorado, being celebrated, seemingly. Plus, 2 local stories take aim at Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. How did they do? Chris will analyze it. The real Woodward, Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, proudly on AFR Talk.